Retro.
Hi, this is Emily Swallow, the Armorer in The Mandalorian. You're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. This is the way.
Hello everyone, this is Dennis. You're about to hear a replay of episode 647 of Podcast Stardust. We originally covered this episode of the Clone Wars, which was the final episode from Season 2. It's called Letal Trackdown. And rather than re-record a new episode about it as part of our rewatch, we are just going to go ahead and rebroadcast this one. So thanks for listening and enjoy. Hello, my friends, and welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we are excited to get back to our Hondo Ohanka series in this episode. It is good business, after all. But first, Jay can remind everybody where we can be found around the internet.
Yes. We are on Twitter or X, Facebook, and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
All right, the dishes are lying, the signal is boosted to maximum output, the shield is down. Someone scraped that guy off the floor, he's leaking. And we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. This will be our discussion of the Clone Wars, Letal Trackdown, which is episode 22 of Season 2, which was actually the season finale of Season 2 of the Clone Wars. Spoilers. If you haven't seen this, 15-year-old episode, that's on you. But I'm giving you that warning anyways. So again, we'll be focusing on Hondo for the most part, but there's a lot of stuff that happens without him in this episode, so we'll be touching on some of that too. But before we kind of get into discussion, Jay, you want to go ahead and give us a summary of the episode?
You bet. Here we go. After nearly getting revenge on Mace Windu for killing Jango, Boba Fett, with the assistance of Aurra Sing, take their Republic hostages to Florrum and challenge Mace to come find them. Plo Koon and Ahsoka act in Mace's place and, after an investigation, successfully track them down. Despite Aurra's plight, Hondo Ohanka refuses to help her, as getting involved with the Jedi is never a good idea. With a little assistance from Hondo, the Jedi successfully rescue the hostages and take Boba into custody.
Right. So this episode was the last of a 3-part series. And the gist of it was that Boba Fett wanted to get revenge on Mace Windu. And so he poses as a young clone cadet, ends up getting a Jedi Star Cruiser destroyed, and then gets Anakin and Mace trapped on the bridge, and R2-D2 has to go lead a rescue mission to get them there from Gundarks and all kinds of stuff. It's real fun. Mm-hmm. And then at the end, it turns out Boba's working with Aurra Sing. And as you just said in the summary, they've escaped with the hostages. So we learned a lot about Boba Fett. There's some really great Hondo moments in this as well. But what did you think about this episode overall?
Well, even though we're watching this to, focus on Hondo, it just really brought back the, how do I want to say it? Just the in-your-face kind of way that Clone Wars is so much different than the other animated shows that we've gotten since then. So much more brutal, I guess, is one of the words that I want to look for, I guess, there. And just with the way that Aurra Sing was just so lethal, and, some of the things that were going on within this particular episode that were kind of very adult themed. And I hadn't really realized until going back to watch this, it was like, oh, wow. Some of the things that were said and, some of the things that were going on in the forefront and in the background was like, whew, this is pretty intense. But even just Aurra Sing herself is intense.
Yeah, so let's talk about her for a moment here. She's the one that's really driving Boba towards getting revenge here on Mace Windu. And, she is encouraging him to be ruthless, to be bloodthirsty. They send that holo transmission to the Jedi Temple, and Boba's got his gun to the back of Commander Pons. head, and basically saying, if the longer it takes you to come get us, the more people are going to be executed, and Boba can't do it. He can't pull the trigger on this person, who's kneeling before him, and so Aura Singh does it, and then later she throws him up against the wall and is like, "Don't you ever disrespect me like that." Summarizing, paraphrasing,
Right.
and then later, she's really trying to. What do you think is behind all this with Aura? She's really insistent that Boba follow through on all this. It's really quite manipulative.
Well, like I said, I mean, she's so intense, and
Mhm.
even seeing her in The Phantom Menace for the very first time and just knowing how lethal she can be, it's almost as if she was using Boba as her own little pawn to get, things done that she wanted to do and just to have the excuse to, wreak havoc on people in general. And also maybe to get back to Hondo, which surprised me, and I completely forgot about that she and Hondo had a little relationship going
Yeah,
on,
yeah,
even if it was just nothing but a fling, because it caught me off guard when Hondo looks over Aura's shoulder at Boba and says, "Not mine, I'm assuming." It was like,
yeah.
whoa, okay. They just went there.
Indeed, indeed. So it's interesting because I didn't rewatch the 2 episodes that came before this one,
Mhm.
and maybe the motivation is there, but it's like I don't feel like there was any opportunity for real profit here for her on this one. And the best I could come up with is that she's just trying to make Boba in her own image, so that
Yeah.
she's got this other bloodthirsty person that's has no compunctions about killing anybody, and so there's that. But she also kind of works herself into a corner because she knows the Jedi is coming after them, and her back's up against the wall, and then Hondo doesn't want to talk about it, or doesn't want to help, I
Right.
should say. So another thing I wanted to touch on here, we kind of see this hospital wing that Mace and Anakin are recovering in, and Anakin is kind of prodding Mace about this fact that we need to go after Boba Fett. He just sabotaged just like, or ambushed just like this. Probably my word choice tonight. But and you just want to sit there, and then Mace. I really like this moment for Mace. He's like, "So you're suggesting I should seek revenge?" And that's not our way. And I should act like this child. That doesn't make any sense. And it's not until Aura Singh shows up with that holotransmission and kills a hostage that Mace says, "Well, now things are different. We got lives on the line here that I go to deal with." And he also reminds Anakin, need I remind you we're in the middle of a war here? I guess that's a long-winded way of saying, for all the flack that I feel like Mace has caught over the past couple years, especially in relation to Ahsoka, I really respected his viewpoint in this instance.
No, I agree with you. And it's interesting that you say that too, because as Anakin was talking to Mace, this was really kind of a flashback for me of how impetuous Anakin could be, especially during, Attack of the Clones, the movie, and just the way that he acted at that time, that he was just right. He was so impatient. He wanted to do certain things the way that, just jumping into certain things, and he was always just not where his mind needed to be, essentially, and that was kind of what we were seeing here too. So it was a nice touch for that, just to be, for me at least, to be able to make that connection to the movies and to that particular character, because I don't know about you, but sometimes there, and maybe this is just me, but I tend to compartmentalize the characters as I see them in their different presentations, if you will. So we've got Clone Wars Anakin, and then we've got movie Anakin, and then we've got, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And so to be able to make the jump from one to the other is kind of a nice little thing for my brain personally, and it ties it together a lot better.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is just a different portrayal of Mace than what we kind of see of him later
Hmm.
in the
Hmm.
Clone Wars, where there is this friction between him and Ahsoka when she's not willing to come back into the fold, and he delivers that citizen line that a lot of people
Yeah.
took umbrage with. But yeah, I don't know. I liked it because you can see why he is a master on the Jedi Council, because he is kind of caring. Revenge. They're not about revenge. We're just talking about in the first episode of the series when Obi-Wan and Anakin met Hondo, and they left, and and Hondo's like, that's it. You're just gonna leave me? Leave? He's like, well, we have no quarrel with you. We don't take revenge.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, again, it's a good reminder for Anakin in this regard. But
Indeed.
okay, so you alluded to it. Aura and Boba, Bosk, and Kestis make their way to Florrum, and Aura's looking for some help with Hondo, and he meets her at the landing dock, and Florrum has been completely redesigned. It's fun to hear Dave Filoni talk about that Hondo's office was modeled after his own, all the clutter.
Oh,
If you
nice.
watch the little special features over there on StarWars.com. And this, I mean, right off the bat, Aura gives him this really aggressive kiss, and he has to like wipe his mouth
Yeah.
afterwards on this one. And to your point, it's like, he asks, not mine, I take it. And okay, semi-adult portion of this show. I'm not sure how Boba would be a cross between those two anyway.
Right.
So
true.
yeah, I mean, I think it was a clever way of them telling us the depth of that relationship
Yes.
that might go over kids' head and not lead
Mm-hmm.
to a difficult conversation, but still.
Exactly. Well, that's just like there's so many different cartoons that I know my husband and I would watch, like the Fairly Odd Parents, for example, and there's a lot of adult humor in that show that goes right over the kids' head. So this is very much in line with that. But right afterwards, what I really appreciated about this was just the fact that Hondo addresses Boba directly,
Mhm.
and he tells him that he knew his father, and that his father, meaning Django, was an honorable man.
Yep.
And so it kind of puts, that into perspective that, oh my gosh, like Hondo knew Django, and they kind of had the same sort of a code. We've talked so much about Hondo having this code of honor, and does he really have a code of honor, and where does he stand with all of that, and just kind of knowing that relationship existed is really cool.
Right. And I also feel like there is a bit of an evolution with Hondo in this episode, which we'll get to as we get to some of the other scenes here. But I just could not let this part of the episode go, because one of the things we love so much about Hondo is his Hondoisms, some of the quotes that we get from him. And, so he's talking to Ara, and, he is introduced to Boa, and, he says, let's go inside where we can discuss business over a drink like civilized people,
Hmm.
which was great in the way that Jim Cummings delivered that line. It was fantastic. But he's talking about civilized people, and in the background, there's two Kowakian monkey lizards pummeling each other. Just,
Yeah.
and there's no civilization happening here whatsoever.
No. Very much at odds with what is going on around him. But, then again, Hondo is the master of kind of making like chaos out of non-chaos, and vice
Uh-huh.
versa. You know what I mean? So he can be the eye of the storm just as well as he can create the storm himself.
Yeah. Yeah. So they get inside the bar, and this is where Ara Singh overhears Castus talking to Fong Do, which is Nautilin, back on Coruscant, that's being voiced by James Arnold Taylor. And Castus is basically saying, this job's gone south. I'm getting out, but I know where Ara Singh is, and this is information that would be worthwhile to the right ears. And so basically, Castus wants to try and sell this information to the Jedi Order, and Ara overhears this and shoots him right in the head as he turns around. And again, another great Hondo line. Hey, someone scraped that guy off the floor. He sprung a leak. And, this is a man who is accustomed to violence.
Right.
And it is kind of interesting in the scope of what he tells Boba later about doing the honorable thing. And, while he doesn't make a big deal of it with Ara Singh here, that she just cold-blooded murdered somebody in his establishment, that's not the honorable thing. And I think that's part of the reasons why Hondo and Ara aren't really a thing anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can also tell how much Boba was affected by that cold-bloodedness of Aura throughout this whole thing. I mean, even back with the clone hostages, because, even though Boba was saying, about dirty clone, or I'm not a clone, or whatever, that there was a little bit of trepidation there on his part, just because of the fact that they were clones. And then to witness Aura just shooting this guy in cold blood was another thing that did not sit well with him. And, as you said, Hondo is accustomed to this kind of thing, but is he okay with it just because he's accustomed to it? And I think that that's what he's alluding to very much so with Boba is, just mentioning the fact that he knew his father and his father was an honorable man, and that Boba really kind of looks to Hondo more as that honorable person than Aura, obviously, because everything she's doing is just rubbing Boba the wrong way.
Yeah. I do feel like we have to be careful when talking about Hondo and honor, because we cannot forget at the end of that two-parter, with Dooku captured, that he basically hung Anakin and Obi-Wan up and started torturing them with the idea of seeing which one of them was going to fail first. But I think that's also one of the reasons why I use the word evolution in Hondo and his character here, because he made light of it with the way he talked about this guy having sprung a lake and being scraped off the floor. But he does have this way of persuading Boba about the right thing to do by speaking of honor and what Jango would have done as well. And okay, so skipping forward briefly, I guess we'll just mention that Ahsoka and Plo Koon are on Coruscant trying to figure out what's going on. They overhear the story about this murder, which is what leads them to Florrum. But we'll leave that aside for another conversation. Then we see Aura in Hondo's office, and he's got his feet up on the desk, and he says, "Well, my dear, you're in an interesting predicament once again. Getting involved with the Jedi is never a good idea." And he tells her that he's not going to help her, but he's not going to hinder her. What do you think about all that?
Well, he's basically saying, yeah, I'm going to stay neutral on all of this. And I think that part of that is probably because of the experiences that Hondo has had thus far, with the Jedi, is that, he understands what good business and not good business is, obviously. And so he's kind of deciding where he's going to place his chips, in this betting per se. And so he doesn't want to put all of his chips in with Aura, obviously, because she's just kind of a loose cannon. But yet again, he doesn't want to side one way or another. He's just keeping his options open because that's good business, And his loyalties right now are kind of teetering, and he doesn't really have a true loyalty, is what it makes me feel like at this point, is that, he's just basically all in for whatever is going to be the best for Hondo. And, and sometimes that's not always a bad way to go.
Yeah, I think you did a good job describing it there. The good business line was what I was going to hit on as well, because he's learned in his two encounters with Obi-Wan and Anakin, and we don't know if he's had any other encounters with other Jedi at this point or not, that it does not pay to go up against them. At the end of the last episode, this effort is no longer profitable as he leaves, when he lost a bunch of his men and equipment. And then, the trouble he had to go through trying to ransom off Dooku, Anakin, and Obi-Wan, and it was all for naught. He's also learned that you don't want that type of attention if you can avoid it. And if there's no profit to be gained, then it's not worth going in on this venture. What you were saying. And again, it's just like, he also doesn't want to anger Aura. And so he has to tell her, it's like, look, I cannot help you. This is going to put me in a bad spot. You being here is bad, but I'm not going to hinder you either. You do what you got to do, but I don't want any part of it. And so, yeah, definitely good business. I think that's absolutely the correct way to describe everything there. So the Jedi show up, and Hondo's there to greet them. And again, I love this interaction as well. Hondo is talking to Plo, and Plo says, "I assume you're walking us into a trap," and you should. She is waiting inside for you. And so why are you telling this? So that you will know I have nothing to do with it. And he's like, I don't know what she's planning, but I don't have anything to do with it. And then we get that fun, interesting face-off between Aura and Plo Koon, which is such a classic Western moment, with them both sitting on opposite sides of the table, and then Boba comes up behind Plo, puts a blaster to his head, and then Ahsoka comes up behind Aura and puts a saber to her throat. And there's the little bomb that's used as a distraction, and then Aura gets away, and Boba is absolutely crestfallen because she doesn't try and save him or get him out of that
Mhm.
mess.
Yep, indeed. And you just kind of going back to what you were saying about that classic Western thing. I
Mhm.
was thinking the exact same thing, even down to the lighting,
Yeah.
the way that the whole thing was lit. And when Ahsoka comes in and she like takes off part of Aura's like antenna thing was a nice little touch. But yeah, poor Boba. I mean, he realizes at that point that Aura really never, cared a lick about him, that he was just kind of that pawn, as I was saying, in her little machinations that she was, whatever it was that she was trying to achieve.
Right. And so Aura runs out the door. Ahsoka's in pursuit. Aura jumps on a speeder bike and races off. And as Ahsoka's running by, one of Hondo's Weequays lifts up a blaster, and Hondo grabs the barrel and pushes it down
Mhm.
because he's like, "There again. That's not good business. It's never a good idea to get involved with the Jedi." And then Plo appeals to Hondo to tell Boba that he needs to tell them where the hostages are. And this is where Hondo says, it's what Jango would have done, and it's the honorable thing to do, which you were touching on earlier.
Mhm.
Again, like I said, I feel like we have to be a little bit careful with Hondo Ohanka because there's a lot of things that he's not above doing, and we'll see that in upcoming episodes. And there's some things you're like, just when you think he's getting chummy with the Jedi, he makes some decisions. You're like, really? That's what you're doing, Hondo?
Mhm.
But at the same time, there is absolutely zero profit, and it's not good business to let his man take out a Jedi and bring them down on his head.
Yeah, Hondo definitely keeps us guessing when it comes to, his overall motives,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah.
And so we get the conclusion of this episode that Ahsoka realizes that, or some help from Plo, and after what they learned from Boba, that Aura is trying to lead them away from the hostages. So Ahsoka doubles back. She gets there. She frees them. Aura shows up, tries to talk off in Slave One, which is interesting because they're no longer calling it that. It's just a fire spray gunship.
Mhm.
And Ahsoka disables it and ends up crashing. And then everyone presumes Aura's dead. And then Boba Fett and Bosk get carted off to prison. And Boba says, I realize I did some terrible things, but I'll never forgive you for murdering my father. And Mace's response is, well, you're going to have to. So don't
Yeah.
know if I agree with Mace there, but that's, you can't just tell someone that they're going to have to.
Mhm.
But anyway,
Especially when it comes to forgiveness, because forgiveness is not something that you can demand of another person. And it's just so interesting too. I mean, I know this is a Hondo discussion, but just kind of going back and revisiting this young Boba Fett now that we've gotten the book of Boba Fett and being able to kind of connect those two dots over this much time. It's
yeah,
just
that's a
really
really good
cool.
point because I think the way Boba Fett came off in the Book of Boba Fett, which was someone who was interested in doing following a more honorable path. He made an
Mhm.
alliance with the Tuscans, and then he wanted to take over Mos Espa and get rid of the uh, crime lords that were there, and kind of install himself as the major domo of um, or what was the position? I think this was no. Well, is in charge of
The
Tatooine,
daimyo.
daimyo of Tatooine. Thank you.
Mhm.
And it was kind of like, well, that does that make sense? Well, this episode shows that that's in his background, and so I mean, if you aren't up on the Clone Wars, you may have missed it. And quite frankly, I kind of forgot
Mhm.
about
Me
some of
too.
Boba Fett's interactions in this one, but I feel like he learned a lesson here that he was able to take to heart that paid off later for him.
Yeah, for sure. And I just always remember like this perpetual scowl that was always on young Boba's face, like his entire childhood, pretty much.
Yeah, yeah. But so of the three stories we've covered that have included Hondo so far, which one is your favorite?
Honestly, I think the first set that we did was my favorite just because it just brings back so many great memories of the introduction of who Hondo is. And we've been kind of bouncing back and forth like a little pinball in some of these with, it do I still love Hondo as much as I thought I did? Do I think he's too much of a scoundrel? I mean, of course I still love Hondo as much as I always did, but it just surprises me how much of his personality I had actually forgotten. and some of the things that he's done that I kind of get taken aback on, and I think to myself, oh my gosh, Hondo, like, come on. But like you said, he's become so loved that we often maybe tamp down some of those not so
Yeah.
pleasant kinds of things that he's done. But what about you? What's been your favorite one so far?
It's hard to say. I just love some of his lines from those, the Gungan General and Dooku captured episodes that we discussed together, and then again just the Hondoisms that come up in that Bounty Hunters episode. I always say, talk softly and drive a big tank.
Yes.
Things like that. That's what one of the things that makes Hondo so endearing is some of those lines and the way that Jim Cummings delivers them. There, I think this episode might be my favorite, just because I feel like there was such a nuanced performance for Hondo here in this episode, even though he wasn't like the key character, and this, because it really comes down to Boba Fett, but just kind of a, is Hondo being Hondo, but and this is where that Jack Sparrow comparison comes in that I've alluded to a couple times, that he does have some wisdom about him, and so he's making smart decisions, but still, there's that hint of goofiness about him
Mhm.
that we like as well. So I don't know. It was just something about the performance here and the way he talks to Boba and how he kind of protects his position between the bounty hunters on one side and the Jedi on the other. I just really appeals to me.
Yeah, for sure. And it's hit me as you were talking too, is that even though Hondo is not the quote unquote main character in some of these episodes, you can't help but to not remember him as a standout part of all of these episodes, regardless of whether or not he had, 5 minutes of animation time or if he had 15 minutes of animation time. He's just a presence that just truly is present
Very,
at all
very true.
times.
Indeed. Okay. Well, then I think that'll bring us to the end of this discussion of. All right, there you have it. That was our discussion of episode 22 from season 2 of the Clone Wars, which was Letal Trackdown. Thank you all for joining us as we rebroadcast that. We'll be back tomorrow with the next episode in our Clone Wars rewatch, which is the season premiere from season 3. So make sure you stick around for that. If you've enjoyed it and you haven't done so, I would greatly appreciate it if you'd subscribe to the podcast. Then make sure that'll help you make sure you get all the episodes as they come out on a weekly basis. And then if you could leave us a rating and review, that would also be greatly appreciated. If you want to catch everything else that we got going on in Podcast Stardust, one of the best places you can do that is to head over to RetroZap, and you can find all the other shows that are on the network there, plus the entire back catalog of 940 some odd shows that we've got so far. Just a reminder, you can find the show on Instagram and Facebook at Podcast Stardust. We've also got some Pinterest pages that Jay manages. The show is available on both YouTube and YouTube Music, audio only. And if you want some Podcast Stardust swag, then make sure you head over to TeePublic, and you can find all of our designs on t-shirts and other apparel. So upcoming on the show Monday, again, we're getting back into the next episode of our Clone Wars rewatch, and then on Wednesday, we are talking Revenge of the Sith. So with that, thanks for listening to this episode of Podcast Stardust. Have a great week, and until next time, may the Force be with you.